If you guys remember, Peter and Fudge's dad took them to his office for the day, and they were being led around by his dad's secretary, Janet. And they had just come to the Toddlebite commercial making, where Mr. Vincent was picking one of the kids for the commercial, but only one kid can be picked. So they're kind of watching that happen. You mean only one of these kids is going to be picked? That's right, Janet said. Who picks him? I asked. Your father and Mr. Denberg are doing it. But of course, Mr. Vincent, the president of Toddlebite Company, has to approve. Just then the door opened and a secretary came out. Next, she called to the waiting kids. My Murray's next, a mother said. Oh, no, he's not, another mother called out. Sally is next. Ladies, please, you'll all have your turn, the secretary said. Murray got to be next. He was a little red-headed kid, and he wasn't in the other room for 2 minutes when the door opened and a big man with a cigar in his mouth came out. No, 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 he shouted. He's not right at all, not the type. Murray started crying. His mother yelled at the big man. What do you know anyway? You wouldn't know a treasure if you found one. She shook her fist at him. Janet whispered to me, That's Mr. Vincent, the president of Toddlebite. Mr. Vincent walked to the center of the room. He looked around at all the kids. When he looked over at us, he pointed and called, There he is! That's the kid I want! I thought he meant me. I got really excited. I could just see myself on TV riding a Toddlebike. All my friends would turn on their sets and say, Hey, look, there's Peter. While I was thinking about what fun it would be, Mr. Vincent came over and grabbed Fudge. He lifted him up. Perfect, he cried. He's perfect. The mothers who were waiting picked up their kids and left right away. Mr. Vincent took off with Fudge in his arms. Janet chased him, and she called, But Mr. Vincent, you don't understand. Mr. Vincent? I ran after Janet. Mr. Vincent carried Fudge into the other room. He announced, I found him myself, the perfect kid to ride the Toddlebike in my new commercial. Mr. Vincent put Fudge down and took the cigar out of his mouth. There were 2 other men in the room. One of them was Mr. Denberg. The other was my father. Hi, Daddy, Fudge said. George, my father told Mr. Vincent, this is my son. He is not an actor or a model. He can't make your Toddlebite commercial. He doesn't have to be an actor or a model. He's perfect the way he is, Mr. Vincent insisted. Now look, George, we want to make the best possible commercial for your company, but Fudge can't be the boy riding the Toddlebike. Now you listen here, Hatcher. Mr. Vincent raised his voice. I wondered why he called my father Hatcher, just like Mr. Yarby did. Mr. Vincent pointed to Fudge. Either that kid rides the Toddlebike, or I take my account to another ad agency. It's that simple. My father looked at Mr. Denberg. It's your decision, Warren, Mr. Denberg told my father. I don't want to be the one to tell you what to do. My father picked up Fudge and held him on his lap. Would you like to ride the Toddlebike, Fudge? It's just like the one you have at home. Why are you asking him? I said. What does he know about making commercials? My father acted like he had forgotten I was even in the room. I'm thinking, Peter, he said. Please be quiet. I'm thinking, Peter. Please be quiet, he said. Well, Hatcher, Mr. Vincent said. What'll it be? That kid of yours, or do I move my account to another agency? I remember how my father lost the Juicio account on account of Fudge. And maybe he'd lose this one too, and I don't think he can afford that. Finally, my father said, All right, George, you can use him, on one condition, though. What's that, Hatcher? Mr. Vincent asked. The commercial has to be made this afternoon. After today, my son is no longer available. That's fine with me, Hatcher, Mr. Vincent said. Is he going to get paid? I asked my father. I'll worry about that, Peter, my father said, and that probably meant yes. He'd be paid and have lots of money in the bank, and I'd have nothing. And someday I'd have to borrow from him. No, wait, never. I'm never borrowing money from Fudge. I'll starve first. Can I eat? Can I at least watch when you make the commercial, I asked. Certainly, my father said. You can watch the whole thing. I turned to Mr. Denberg. Will Fudge be famous? I asked. No, not famous, but a lot of people will think he looks familiar, Mr. Denberg said. I turned to Mr. Vincent. Do you know he has no front top teeth? It's part of the charm, Mr. Vincent said. And he cut all his hair off 2 months ago? Well, he looks fine now, Mr. Vincent said. And he can't even talk in long sentences yet, I said. He doesn't have to say a word, Mr. Vincent told me. I couldn't think of any other reason why Mr. Vincent should use Fudge in his Toddle Bike commercial. It was settled then. Fudge would be famous soon, and I would be plain old Peter Hatcher. 4th grade, nothing. Let's begin right after lunch, Mr. Denberg said. We should get it filmed in about 2 hours. While my father and Mr. Denberg worked out all the arrangements, I asked Janet where the men's room was. She walked me to it. I told her thank you and that she didn't have to wait. I'd find my own way back. When I was safely inside, I looked at myself in the mirror. I wish Fudge had never been born, I thought. Everything good always happens to him, and if he had been born, I wish he could have been 9 or 10 like me. Then Mr. Vincent wouldn't want him to be the one to ride the Toddle Bike in his commercial. It's kind of sad. He's regretting his brother was born, and he's jealous. Maybe if you have a brother or sister, you kind of relate. I can't. I know I can't. I have a little brother, and always felt like he was the one that got everything. Janet sat down at the coffee shop for some sandwiches and drinks. After we ate, we all walked to another section of the agency where the cameras were set up. A make-believe street scene was the background. The Toddle Bike was shiny and red, and my father told Fudge all he had to do was ride it around. Fudge liked that, and he zoomed all over the place. Vroom, 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 he called. My father and Mr. Vincent and Janet sat on the folding chairs and watched the action. I sat on the floor at my father's side. Mr. Denberg was the director. He said, Okay, Fudge, we're ready to begin now. You ride the Toddle Bike where I tell you, and I'll take a picture of you doing it, all right? All right, Fudge said. Let me start over. You ride the Toddle Bike where I tell you, and I'll take a picture of you doing it, all right? Fudge says, he doesn't say all right, he says no. Of course he does. No, Fudge said. What does he mean, Hatcher? Mr. Vincent asked. What does he mean, no? Ugh, my father groaned. Look, George, using Fudge was your idea, not mine. Mr. Denberg tried again. Okay, Fudgy, this is it, the cameraman said. Start riding this way. Ready, set, go. Fudge sat there on the Toddle Bike, but he wouldn't pedal. Come on, kid, let's go, the cameraman called. No, I don't want to, Fudge answered. What's with this kid, Mr. Hatcher? The cameraman asked. Fudge, my father said, do what the nice man tells you. No, I don't want to. Janet whispered to my father. How about some cookies, Mr. Hatcher? Good idea, Janet. My father told her. I have some Oreos right here, she said, patting her pocketbook. Shall I give them to him? One at a time, my father said. Janet walked across the room to Fudge, and he was sitting on the Toddle Bike. If you do what the nice man says, I'll give you a cookie, Janet told him. Show me, Fudge said. Janet held up a box of Oreos. She was really well prepared, I thought. She must eat all day long, what with a cracker shaped like goldfish and a whole box of Oreos. I wondered what else she had in her pocketbook. Gimme, Fudge said. Janet held up one cookie. Fudge reached for it, but Janet didn't give it to him. If you do what the nice man says, you can have an Oreo. Maybe 2 or 3 Oreos. First cookie, Fudge said. First, you do what the man said, Janet asked. No cookie. Give him one, Janet, Mr. Denberg called out. We haven't got all day to fool around. Janet gave Fudge 1 Oreo. All right, kid. All ready now? You ride over to me. Fudge didn't do it. Mr. Vincent was losing his patience. Hatcher, he hollered. You'd get that son of yours to ride the Toddlebike, or I'm taking my account away from your agency. Must I remind you, George, using Fudge was your idea, not mine, my father said. Forget whose idea it was, Hatcher. He's your kid. You better get through to him now. I have an idea, my father said. He walked to the corner of the room and beckoned to the others. Mr. Denberg and Mr. Vincent gathered around him, along with the cameraman and Janet. They looked like a bunch of football players huddled together, talking about the next play. Soon my father called to me, Peter, would you join us, please? Sure, Dad, I said. Excuse me. What is it? Peter, we want you to ride the Toddlebike for us. Just show Fudge how it's done. But he already knows how to ride, I said. Didn't you see him zooming all around? He won't do it for the cameras, though, my father explained. So we need your help. Well, will I be in the commercial too, I asked. Well, the Toddlebike is really for very young children, Mr. Denberg said. Otherwise, we'd have you do it in a minute. I got the message. It was like buying the shoes and like Dr. Brown's office. They were going to use me to get Fudge to do what they wanted him to do. I wondered how anybody would ever manage my brother without my help. I walked over to Fudge and told him I was going to ride the Toddlebike. Get off, I said. Fudge held the bike. No, it's mine. Not yours, my father told him. But Fudge wouldn't move for anything. He closed his eyes and screamed. Can he scream loud when he tries? So my father tried to pull him off the Toddlebike, and Fudge kicked and kept screaming, and I'll bet Mr. Vincent was sorry that he ever spotted my brother in the first place. I got on the Toddlebike. It was so small that my knees practically touched the ground. But I managed to ride it around just where the cameraman told me to. See how nice Peter can ride the Toddlebike, Janet said. Here, Peter, come have an Oreo. You did so good. You can have 2 or 3. Fudge stopped screaming. Me, he said. What? My father asked. Me ride. Me. I ride. Me. Can't ride as well as Peter can, Mr. Denberg said. Can so, Fudge told him. I don't think so, Mr. Denberg said. You already had your turn, and you didn't do like what I told you to do. Me. You want to try again? My father asked. Again, Fudge said. Well, I don't know. Well, Mr. Vincent said, chewing on a cigar. Well, the cameraman said, scratching his head. Please, begged Fudge. I never heard my brother say please before. Mr. Denberg said, okay, we'll give you one more chance. Fudge ran to the Toddlebike. I got off and jumped on. Now, he asked Mr. Denberg. Now, Mr. Denberg said, ride this way, Fudge, over here, towards me. Just like pizza? Just like pizza? Fudge said. Janet gave me a kiss on the cheek. You saved the day, Peter Hatcher, she said. When she wasn't looking, I wiped it off my face. Her kiss was too juicy. It was good.